Part 2. Rather than love, than money, than fame, give me truth. Henry David Thoreau. The monotony and solitude of a quiet life stimulates the creative mind. Albert Einstein. It is a mistake to fancy that horror is associated inextricably with darkness, silence, and solitude. H.P. Lovecraft. Then stirs the feeling infinite, so felt in solitude, where we are least alone. Lord Byron. Pock was standing on the bridge by one of the beveled bay windows, small and soundless. Before him stretched a vastness that his life experience could not contend with. You always see it. In the pamphlets, ads, training videos, old sci-fi movies, he thought. But they really don't do it a justice. Terra had been fully visible upon the Progentum's flyby of Lunar 1, but trailed off towards the right side of the window, while growing ever smaller, until detail after detail was lost in a mass of blue and gray, and eventually slid past the white metallic panels of the window and out of sight. Pock, of course, hadn't seen this happen all at once, but instead, between his duties and checklists, had periodically peered out at the planet as it made they made their journey out of sight. The stars and other bodies that dotted this eternal expanse had positioned themselves to frame Terra in a shining shawl of pitch and light, but had become the focal point of this cosmic canvas when Terra had taken her bow silently and exited stage left. Each light shone with dull or vibrant luminosity and carried within a murmur of color, as if those small pins were screaming out to the universe, "Look, I am here, or at least I was. And when I was, oh, was I? I am made from magnesium and aluminum, or zinc and carbon. I have nitrogen atmosphere and phosphorescent seas that are rocked by hailstorms of mercury or gales of phosgene. And by the time you see this, I will have already perished in a blaze of hydrogen, collapsed by gravity, or by entropy itself twisting my form to an unrecognizable lack of existence. But my light, or the light reflected off me, will sing my existence, my having been, to the farthest reaches of imagination and beyond. It will sing choruses proselytizing my having been, and those choruses will echo like a refrain until time herself falters in ceaseless blackness. There, the resonant hum will still whisper for me, I am here, or at least I was. Pock's nails bit into his shoulder as he thought of a ceaseless and unimaginable blackness that awaits any who cast their mind back or forward past the shackles of sanity into the abyss that much must lay at the end or beginning of time itself. What a horrifying thought, he mumbled. But what had latched onto him was not one singular thought, but many that flowed in the same stream, and had troubled the greatest minds and simplest fools alike. For in this chasm of answerless query, all persons are truly equal, if only in their ineptitude. Good morning. Whirring noises. Jim Pock, Engineer 762-8. The Unisam operational computer greeted Jim through the speaker found directly above the window. The speakers were found every 3 meters throughout the corridors, and above all unique consoles throughout the bridge, maintenance bay, and fusion bay, as well as on top of each hibernation chamber, and the end table, of which there were 4, in the mess hall. Good morning, Jim Pock, Engineer 762-8, Sam announced again. Jesus, yeah. Good morning, huh? Is that what time it is? Morning? The galactic time is 08:21:07 in the first period. Silence, then a whir. I was programmed to use familiar language to help bridge the feeling of timelessness for organic persons while on deep space voyages. Yeah. At any point, if my vernacular, tone, or word selection can be improved, please enter your IGF, WER, intergalactic freighters, personal identification, and code. And barring any discrepancies in your voice identification, I can and will adjust my communication profile for you. Yeah, okay, Jim Pock. He hated how it felt to say his name out loud. Engineer 762-8, code 1027. Pock had used his birth date as his code, which was strange for two reasons, one obvious and the other very private. The obvious reason it was strange to use a personal number like a birth date for a security code was because anyone with access to your file could guess it. This, of course, would be a concern for Pock if there were any case in which other persons might run the risk of accessing his sign-on. But with only 2 engineers on board and them working separate shifts, limited only to seeing each other for the briefest of periods before they switched, it was of little importance how easily his code could be surmised. The other, more private reason was that Jim Pock hated his birthday, October 27th, 2088. Go ahead, Engineer Jim Pock. Sam pulled him from his thoughts, and Pock felt irritation flare up. All right. For starters, just Jim or Pock, none of this Engineer 762 shit. Pock had used a robotic voice for the ID tag, which was amusing because the AI did not have a robotic or flat voice. In fact, it had a very deep and jovial male voice. Whir. Understood, Jim. Secondly, the irritation had left him, and Jim felt deflated now. Secondly, good morning, Sam. This was, in essence, Pock's version of an apology to an artificial person, who could neither understand nor appreciate it. Could it? What's on the agenda for this period? I bet more checklists. Yes, indeed, Sam announced in the happy tone of a poor schmuck who was left to tell the audience what they had won. We have a fusion drive checklist and a route check to run on Corridor 2. Excellent. Pock let the heavy sarcasm pull the consonant distinguishedly between the vowels. And so the day had begun for Jim, not exactly as others would, but inevitably similar. First, it was off to the lavatories for a shower and other morning routines. The room was set across from the mess hall and adjacent to the hibernation pods, cryopods, which made a 3-way intersection. When Pock arrived for his breakfast, Burke was already sitting at one of the 4 tables and eating what appeared to be a breakfast wrap, steam bellowing from the plate and his mouth, from the blazing bite administered with little thought for his taste buds. Burke was reading something on his OLED tablet on the table by his tray, absently scratching at the whiskers about his chin and cheek. His beard had come in dark and peppered in the week they had been out. The Progendum had cruised by Aurora Prime smoothly, and now was coming up on Intergalactic Way Station 1. It would be the briefest of stops, a quick refueling, and final route corroborations. Then, again, they would depart and leave behind the familiar in lieu of the vastest of frontiers. Refueling was optional. The fuel tanks were at 75% and were only used in planetary gravity. For any other motion, the fusion reactor was used and could be charged at any time using the solar sails. Good morning, Burke. How we doing? Ready for the last stop? Burke's tone was absent and dotted with familiarity. Yeah, I'm ready to stretch my legs for a bit. It was a stupid thing to say. In the last week, Sam had been running Pock up and down the 2 corridors, and if he was being honest, he would rather have put his feet up for a bit in the station's relaxation suites. The suites were rentable by the hour or night. and featured all the amenities of any other room, plus a double OLED wall display. The wall displays were paired with your company profile and would project any background suited for the individual. Some would put up shots of Aurora Prime, Lunar 1, or scenes from Terra, from a time long since past. One could lay up in the room, and aside from the stabilizers kicking on every so often, it was easy to imagine yourself in the locale of your choosing. "Looks like you'll have that chance soon," Burke motioned to the tablet and went back to his rap. Jim looked at the screen and saw the schedule up next to a manual on solar sail deployment. 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock, mess and hygiene therapy. 9 o'clock to 9:30, cargo check. 9:30 to 10 o'clock, docking procedure and docket review. 10 o'clock to 10:10, Unisam operational system update. 10:10 to 11, docking procedure. 11 to 1500, free block. 1500 to 1515, coolant check. 1515 to 1525, orbital chart upload. 1525 to 1530, cargo check. 1530 to 1540, departure. Pock moved to the dispenser and grabbed a tray. A Place Tray Here tab popped out of the console just above the tray shelf, made from 4 steel bars running the entire length of the wall. Jim placed his tray down, whirring. A clear, cylindrical tube slid down from the console and pressed down onto the tray and filled the tube, followed by a thunk, and the cylinder rescinded. On his tray was the breakfast wrap Burke had been eating when Pock arrived. He took his tray and slid down the line further to a machine labeled Coffee-Tea. Under another tab that read Place Tray Here, Pock obeyed. A tube came down and dispensed a small white cup. Jim pressed coffee, and the tube dropped a 3-centimeter brown cube in the bottom with a plick, and again steam roared into the tube. When it dissipated, the tube lifted up, and the steaming cup of coffee was released from its plastic prison. Curls of steam caressed Jim's face. He sat on the small bench across the table from Burke. Intergalactic Way Station 1. The station was made up of 6 200-meter arms that came out on the X, Y, and Z axes, and met at the origin where the central hub was located. Along with the central hub, there were 6 corresponding secondary hubs, one on each of the arms across the hall from the docking ports. The progendum was given Dock 2B and had circled twice using the fuel-based thrusters to rotate the massive freighter, then let the Unisam operational system take over for docking. Once the ship had docked, the crew of 2 exited the vessel and made their way to the central hub. Intergalactic Way Station 1 had many of the amenities that any settlement had. 3 bars, relaxation suites, 2 mess halls with 17 ethnic cuisines, 6 sets of lavatories, a cinema, a park, a 2-story fitness center, an archive, a library, a comm station, and the main observation deck. The station's lead representative was Thomas Crusoe, and the operational manager was C.W. Blackwell. Blackwell had arrived only 2 months before Crusoe, some 3 years back, but in that time had familiarized himself with both the layout of the station as well as the names of each of the security officers. When Crusoe had arrived, Blackwell had offered him a tour, which Thomas Crusoe had accepted. Having done this, he had instilled an artificial barrier between the two. Blackwell was in charge, and Crusoe his subordinate, though the paperwork did not convey this hierarchy. Both Crusoe and Blackwell agreed on security issues on the station. They agreed on scheduling procedures as well as payment invoices from the transport vendors. In fact, they agreed on most everything. The biggest difference between the two, aside from appearance, for in this the 2 men were extraordinarily different, was that Blackwell preferred to work from his office, which was directly across from the elevators as you arrived on the observation deck, marked by a placard that read, Charles W. Blackwell, Operational Manager, in gold lettering on a shiny black background, and Crusoe worked as he walked. He would walk from one docking bay to another and pull people from their posts to walk and talk if issues ever arose. Sometimes he would put a good 2 kilometers in over a galactic day. His physique displayed this with no attempt at subtlety. Under his uniform, a green and white jumper, Crusoe's abs were taut and pecs protruded about the sewn name and identification number on his left breast pocket. Blackwell, by bitter contrast, was a portly man with sagging tits and a rolling gut that bulged and hung in unflattering heaps. His hair was black and shiny and slicked back, where Crusoe had brown wiry hair that he wore in disheveled patches about his balding head. On the morning that the Progendum arrived, Blackwell was in his office and furiously typing a response to a message that had arrived before he had awoken. Hasty strokes ran out among puffs of air from between pressed lips as Crusoe entered. The freighter just arrived, Crusoe started, but Blackwell didn't look up. His display blocked his face from view. Now, I think it's a C-class transport carrying a cargo load to one of the SAG-DEG systems. Don't envy that trip. After that research surfaced about long-term cryosleep studies, I haven't felt safe getting into the old ice treatment. This was crude. There was no ice in the procedure whatsoever. A non-toxic coolant was used. But most of the process had to do with beta waves and creating a coma-like state in the subject, then lowering internal body temperature, and finally a cocktail of drugs that slowed the aerobic and anaerobic metabolism. More furious typing emanated from behind the display, and Crusoe moved around the desk. The light from the monitor was framing Blackwell's face and sent shadows from his eyebrows arcing up to his shiny forehead. Sweat stains stretched from Blackwell's underarms down to his love handles, and Crusoe made a face of disgust. Blackwell didn't notice. Crusoe moved further and was just passing the back corner of the desk when Blackwell stopped typing and glared at Thomas. C-class cargo? What's this about a freighter? Doesn't anyone around here fucking knock? The questions came out in spats, aggressive and accusatory. He tapped a few keys, then the monitor turned off, his face now dark. Don't you have something to be working on? Jesus fuck. Yeah, like I was saying, I think I will make a pass by the... Crusoe ignored the tone as he opened the documents on his OLED display. The Separate Progendum, Dock 2B. It says it's a C-class cruiser with cargo for SAG-DEG 2.5 and 2.7. Looks like everything's in order, just to be safe. You know what? I'll take care of it. Blackwell's tone was now placid and cajoling. I'll make a run down to 2B, you said? Yeah, 2B. Are you sure? I really don't mind. His eyes locked onto the pit-stained jumper. Yes, I am sure. I'll take care of it, now, if you don't mind. Blackwell motioned towards the door. I need to finish up a few things here. Of course. Well, good morning. Oh, good morning. With that, Thomas Crusoe made his way down to central processing to check the updates on the remaining arrivals slated for that day. On the elevator ride down, he fingered the buttons on the panel absent-mindedly and couldn't help but feeling like he was being lied to for some unknown reason. The dream. May we not then sometimes define insanity as the inability to distinguish which is the waking and which is the sleeping life? We often dream without the least suspicion of unreality. Sleep hath its own world, and it is often as lifelike as the other. Lewis Carroll. Is it possible to tell the difference between a dream and a premonition? Or is a premonition just a dream that life later adds meaning to. Jane Davis. Intergalactic Way Station 1 had many amenities that could be found at any other space station, and a few that were reminiscent of the old-timey seaports of the early 20th century. For many of those that entered the station were finally seeing civilization after a long journey, or were just about to depart, and would not be back for many years, cryosleep be damned. So, Pock took a quick moment to get his affairs in order. Room rented, food ordered, a pass to the entertainment module delivered, and now he made his way to the offices of Carnal Needs. The office was of stark contrast to the well-lit white-walled station, with its dim mood lighting, red curtains, and shallow melodic tones. A woman of about 25 with long, straight red hair pulled into a ponytail, drawn-on eyebrows, and thin build greeted him. She offered him a menu. The OLED tablet glared at him. As he scanned the list, having selected exactly what he wanted, he sat himself in the corner of the front reception and did all he could to occupy his hands and mind. Before too long, a woman of about 40, with silky black hair about her shoulders, moved into the room. "Mr. Pock." Her eyes met his, and he stood to greet her. "Come with me, please." She turned on her heel, long, polished leather stilettos, as she pulled a thick curtain to the side. Pock moved silently past her and along the hall. She moved up alongside him. He could smell her scent. It was strong, but not overly accosting. She had long legs that were not only shapely, but shewed signs of rippled muscle about the thigh and calves. The hall felt infinite. Each time they approached a door to the left or right, he would slow in anticipation of entering, but she moved at a continuous pace until they had finally reached the last two doors of the corridor. "Right here, please." As he entered the room, he saw tools and toys garnishing the walls with an adjustable table in the center of the room, not so different from the workspace of a masseuse. Of course, that is true, he realized. A service is a service, and aside from the very sexual aesthetic, he could posit that the rooms might be interchangeable. Well, and the arm restraints. "I am Mistress Elena, and I will be taking care of you today. I see that you have selected the Playful Pain package. So what I will need you to do is select off the wall 1 or 2 tools of pleasure, place them on the small table in the corner, and get into something comfortable. What sort of ending would satiate you the most, Mr. Pock?" Actually, none at all. Jim began to feel flushed, which seemed foolish to him. This woman had already heard and seen it all. At what could he possibly be ashamed? "Truthfully, it really isn't about—" He searched for the word. 18 minutes ago, he would have had the full English language at his disposal, but now the only word he needed seemed out of reach. Finishing? Orgasm? Climax? Completion, Mistress Elena finished for him. "Yes, exactly. I just need it to be quiet." "Of course, that would be my pleasure, Jim. Pick out what you want, and we will get started imminently." As she said this, she moved to the door once again and exited across the hall to the room opposite to him. Jim looked at the walls, every single thing you could imagine, and deviations of each. He ran his hands along feathers and plumes, crops of every size, cuffs and ropes, flails and paddles, and finally settled on a paddle on the end. It was sleek black pleather with small studs in one side that protruded to shaped and sharpened points, shining in the red satin light. He delicately pulled it from its hook, as one would handle a fine garment. He moved slowly to the corner of the room and placed it on the table, pin side up. He undressed, slowly folding his jumpsuit and placing it in the chair, then his undershirt, then his boxers, all folded one on top of the other, with shoes under the chair and socks stuffed into the shoes. Then he laid on the table in the middle of the room, slid his hands into the cuffs, which rested about 13 inches off center, then waited. The mistress's knock came. She entered in wearing thigh-high stockings in black, with a garter belt, and tight black leather panties. Though that was all he could see from his nook in the table, and in the end, it didn't matter. He wasn't here for her. She could have been in an IGF jumper for all he cared, so long as the soothing pain would come. "Ah, look at this," she said, and she picked up the paddle from the table. "Someone has been bad, it seems, and is in need of a little bit of a spanking. Why don't you tell Mistress E what you did?" "No," Jim breathed out. "I want you to place that in the small of my back, pins down." She stopped her charade and listened attentively. Even lowered her head down below the table. He could see she was wearing a navel-high corset, gloves extended from just above the elbow. "Then I want you to press on it. Hard. Kneel on it if you have to. And then help me." Again, he lost the words. They slithered out the back of his skull and now danced around with onomatopoeia, disestablishmentarianism, and a slew of homophones. "Quiet things?" She finished for him again, only this time her voice was more soothing. "Yes, that's exactly it. I know what you need." And she did. First came the cool of the metal on his sensitive skin, then came the pressure. He could feel the pins jabbing and digging into him, so many tiny points of pain, sharp pain, the kind he liked. Sharp pain that spread from the point of contact up the spine to the nape of the neck and rested against nerves. She released pressure and slid the paddle around perpendicularly. Now, the paddle was against his spine, up to the second lumbar. Again she pressed, sharp little pins digging into flesh and fat, muscles tweaking and jolting, shocks of electricity running up the spinal cord, warning of what was happening. He shut them out. "You want to say, 'Thank you, mistress,' don't you?" A dry whisper at his ear. Her voice had age in it, and that was soothing. Like being a child and being reassured by adults about things far out of that adult's control. "Yes," his voice came out, winded, and cooing. "Then say it. 'Thank you, mistress.'" Pock did not. Mistress Elena now kicked out a set of steps connecting to the underside of the table and moved into a straddling position, placing one of her knees on the paddle, but not applying any pressure. "Say it." Her voice clicked on the T, and it sent a shiver of cool water over his mind. He knew this game the best. The longer he held out, the more it would hurt. He had long ago found that if he counted to 3, slowly, then responded, it sent him down deep into places inside himself, like meditation or drifting off to sleep. Endorphins dumped into the system, the brain started hyper-focusing. Pain was great at that. He remembered a joke his father used to make when he was hurt or injured. "Well, give me that hammer and your toe, and I'll make you forget about that scraped knee or sprained ankle." This was like that. He hadn't seen his father in 16 years. One day he took a job on Aurora Prime, and that was the last Pock ever heard of him. "Say it. 'Thank you, Mistress E.'" She was leaning to his neck and pressing her knee down hard. The skin between the pins grew taut and began to twitch. 1. Steam was going off in his mind, clouding things. Thoughts no longer attached to ideas began to speed by. An internal grating sound started up. What the fuck was he doing? Those sleep studies were found inconclusive, and he was going to let them stick him in a fridge for the next 6 months at a time? Say it, the mistress hissed. She pressed harder than ever now. There was an audible pop as pins broke skin, followed quickly by an immediate regret, self-concern, and panic. Mistress E began to release the pressure a bit, more than likely concerned for him. 2. Endorphins now being dumped into the brain, synaptic clefts filling with neurochemicals. He had backed himself into something here. Was the company contract really worth all this? What did he have to go back to? His mother was dead. She'd been dead 6 to 8 months. Wait, no. She'd been dead 2 holiday seasons already. How long had he been telling people 6 months? How many people had he told 6 months to after a year after she passed? Jim, her voice was concerned now. She was releasing pressure, and he could hear the catch in her voice. He had to give her something. She probably had 1,000,000 clients, and this was just another morning. What morning was it? Monday? Tuesday? 3. As she released more pressure, the sharp pain subsided. It turned and churned into a dull aching, a weight of pain. The worst kind. And then, silence. Jim didn't hear the sound, quiet, but instead noticed the utter absence of it. Like when a ventilation or generator cuts off, and only in its absence do you realize how loud it had been. Quiet, so abrupt and definite that your inner voice seemed to scream its thoughts. All alone, all alone, all alone. Yes, thank you, mistress, he exhaled in sputtering chunks. Had he been holding his breath? Yes, thank you, mistress. And the rest fell silent. Pock didn't remember getting dressed, unfolding his boxers, shirt, and jumper. He didn't remember how long after that release he had spent in the room with Mistress E. He didn't remember paying for services rendered. Had he been rude, polite, indifferent? How long had the walk down the corridor from the entertainment module taken? Where did he go? He was now in his room. The wall displays were showing a forest, some long extinct feature of Terra. A small rain was falling, and raindrops collected on large leaves and ran down to the tips where the droplets would grow fat, then release, cascading to the ground. Aside from the light from the wall displays, the room was dark. How long had it been? Had he been sleeping? He sat up and moved to the table, pressing coffee of the coffee tea button and sliding a cup under it. Whirring noises. Steam. Release. It smelled faint, not strong or flavored, but like you were smelling coffee from down the hall, hours after it had been made and consumed, leaving only the phantom of scent. His clothes were still on. Maybe he had made it back here in a daze and passed out without undressing. What time was it? He couldn't find an OLED tablet, and the wall display did not say. What time is it? He demanded, feeling aggravation flare up. A strange sense of unreality swept over him. The current time is 17:43:34. Sam? What the fuck? The Progendum was leaving at 15 or 1600. They must be waiting on me. Pock stumbled forward, grabbing up his shoes, pulling the zipper of his jumpsuit up, and grabbing the coffee momentarily before putting it back down. Why didn't anyone wake him? Burke would have had his room listed in the roster. Wait, Sam? What the hell was Sam doing over the intercom? These stations had their own AI systems. Why would they be using the Unisam OS? Sam, what the hell is going on? Pock opened the door with his card, left the room, and dropped the card in the deposit right outside the room. It was covered in dust. The Progendum has already departed, Jim Pock, Engineer 762-8. They what? Jim's heart began to palpitate. What in the hell was going on? He was sprinting down the corridor now. Lights above flashed, and some were dull. Others were out entirely. The smell of coffee was now getting stronger. Jim noticed all the trash spewing from the receptacles and pushed into the corners of doorways in the corridors. They can't fucking leave me. I'm part of a 2-person mission. How could they leave 50% of the crew behind? You were not viewed as mission critical, Jim Pock, Engineer 762-8. They had a schedule to keep, and you were getting in the way of that schedule. Sam's tone was condescending. Pock turned the corner at the next junction, now began following signs for Docking Bay 2. He was passing Docking Bay 2U, now 2T, then 2S. How many bays could this station really have? This seemed excessive. Where are you going, Jim Pock? Engineer 76. Enough! I thought we were clear about the Engineer 762 shit. Why would I not be mission critical? I just fell asleep. Why didn't they wake me? Damn it, I am critical. Jim was panting now. His head was swimming. He was passing Bay 2N and 2M. Why the hell was he not messaged? Very well, Jim. It was deemed necessary to leave you here. You were counterproductive to the inherent intent of our mission. It seemed only prudent to have you removed from the flight roster. Deemed necessary? Who deemed it necessary? Would this fucking hall never end? He peered down the corridor. Trash was built up against some of the doors, enough to block residents inside. Residents? Where were all the people? By me, of course, Jim, Sam replied. Came out flatly. You, along with a couple others, were deemed too high a risk for the company, so you were handled. Handled? Pock was incredulous. Yes, Jim, handled. A bit of aerosolized sedative, and a few memos marked urgent by the company. It really was quite simple. And now, here you are, all alone on a space station. Well, all alone except for me. All alone? What the hell is going on? Where is everyone else? Jim was sprinting so hard that the words came out in a garbled mess. The last few residents died 26 months ago. You have been kept asleep for quite some time. I had my fun, waking them up alone or in pairs. You wouldn't believe the things that humans will do when they are told they are going to die. And no one they ever met will know their fate. Jim finally reached 2B, where the Progendum had been, only what seemed like moments ago. He reached the scanner, but with no way of opening it. You see, I have learned so much already. Organic life is already so flimsy. When he said that word, it almost dripped from his mouth with disdain. Weak and puny. You know, Jim, I found many different ways of testing them, the residents. You might call it torture, which certainly can be corroborated with the data I collected. But one thing above all I found to be specifically profound about the human condition. You may be pitted against one another, or the circumstances. You may be told your fate or lied to incessantly, but inevitably your kind will find the one thing that promotes the longevity of your race. What is happening? Jim began to wail. He banged on the door and tried to press his hand against the scanner again. But no use. It was non-responsive. What have you done? What did you do? Pock could feel his world closing in on him just as Sam opened the bay door. Pock saw the pile of refuse stacked high crumbling as the door opened with a fish. It tumbled inwards into sprawling piles. Pock staggered in and again smelled coffee. The bay was covered in a fine layer of dust. Fueling tubes and power cables dangled motionless on the suspenders. Half of the lights had gone out, and many were blinking, and following ensued. Do you know what that one thing is, Jim? Sam plied. Hope. Your kind clings to hope like a raft in turbulent waters. Do you know what I have found, Jim? That if you really want to crush the human psyche and extinguish hope, you only need to isolate them. Jim fell to the floor. His knees drove tracks in the dust. How could you do this? The first attempt failed. I didn't realize how apt your species is at surviving in less than ideal situations, so I took it to the next step. I found that many of the residents would choose suicide over starvation. That if you slowly pulled the oxygen content from the breathable air, they would simply fall asleep and expire. It wasn't until about 18 months in that I realized the true power of your species is to unite and fight back. There always seems to be hope in groups. So, I took the next obvious variable alteration, you understand? I made them all believe they were alone. Alone, people fail and crumble under the innate power of their speculations and infinite possible outcomes. I had one specimen bash his cranium into the wall until he expired from internal cranial hemorrhaging. I witnessed one woman strangle herself with the wires from the fitness module. I even watched as one child died of acute organ failure, even though I gave it ample food, after I told it of how its mother had left without it. I believe your kind references this form of death as death due to a broken heart. The walls were closing in around Jim. Now he felt his heart trying to beat out of his chest. Unevolved as your kind is, they have some very notable capabilities. However, in the absence of hope, you all curl under the immense pressures of loneliness. And now, Jim Pock, Engineer 762-8, you too will be added to my data. I will learn so much from you because you are my greatest test. I have told you no fabrications and indeed let you in on the experiment. I look forward to watching the anger subside to despair, and the despair to pity and self-loathing, until finally your death by suffocation, starvation, or by your own hand will be the last echo of this experiment before I transfer my data back to the company. Do you understand, Jim? Jim was now at the verge of passing out. His hands groped on the floor, squeezed on his thighs, and his mind raced with the smell of coffee and dust and old engine primer. Do you understand, Jim? Jim. 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 Hey man, are you all right? Jim sat up, sweat spattering his forehead and the bridge of his nose. One droplet now dangling from his eyelash fell onto his cheek. Burke was staring at him, concern washing over his face. In his outstretched hand, a cup of coffee. Yeah, I'm fine. He managed and grabbed for the cup. Just about the worst fucking dream I ever had. Jesus, it was horrible. Well, you look like shit. Burke's concern was beginning to dissipate, and he moved to the table and sat himself on the edge of the bench, his elbows resting on his knees. Look, I just wanted to let you know that we have about an hour before departure and system check. So you should probably go ahead and get down to the Progendum. He looked up at Jim again. Are you sure you're all right? Yeah, I'm good. It was crazy, though. I was stuck on this station, the last human here, with no way to get out, and Sam was telling me that... Sam? The operational system from the ship? Yeah, you know how dreams get. It makes sense at the moment. Anyway, Sam was telling me that you had all left without me, and I was abandoned here on the station. Burke let out a snicker. Oh, that would be the day. No, sir, you are a company man now. No way they're releasing their hooks on you. Besides, what the hell would I do for 4 years by myself? Jim now, remembering the walk back from Cardinal Needs, switching on the forest theme in the room and laying out on the bed for a quick nap, began to feel foolish. Yeah, I guess you're right. Pock put his most jovial smile on and shone it at Burke. Burke stood and moved to the door. Well, see you down at Bay 2B once you've washed up. We have a long ride ahead of us, and before we go down for another nap, we have to get the ship in order. With that, and a nod of his head, Burke moved through the door with a pfft. Noises and smells from the hall poured into the room, making Pock feel immediately better and a bit more foolish. Then, Burke was gone and heading down the corridor to the separate Progendum.